Just a minute. This is not how I. Okay, I think this is how I want it to be. Can you see my screen? Do you see the source sheet? Yes, okay.
Yes, we see.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yossi, I can't see. Is it recording now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So it's nice to see nice to see some faces I didn't see for a long time, and hopefully soon we'll be able to see each other more frequently, and not virtually, but actually face to face. So this Purim is going to be an unusual Purim, and not only because of Corona, but also because it is on Friday. And I'm going to discuss two matters that are unique to this coming Purim. The first one is what is called Purim Meshulash. In Yerushalayim, Purim falls on Shabbat, and therefore it causes a phenomena known as a triple Purim, which I'm going to discuss because it also matters to us. Even though we're not in Yerushalayim, there are a few implications of the triple Purim that might apply to us, and I'm going to discuss them. The second part of the shiur, I'm going to discuss the best time and the way on which to eat the Purim Seuda on Friday. Friday is not the best time to eat a Seuda. In fact, halachically, to eat a meal after midday on Friday is problematic because that means that when Shabbat comes in, we won't really have, we're not going to be so keen on eating the Seudat Shabbat. So what should we do with the Purim Seuda on Friday? That is going to be the second thing I'm going to discuss. So let's start with the first thing, the Purim Meshulash. So what are the implications of us for Purim Meshulash? So first of all, what is Purim Meshulash, triple Purim? When Purim falls on Shabbat, for reasons that I am about to discuss, Purim is split into three. We have two things we do on Friday, two things we do on Shabbat, and two things we do on Sunday. On Friday, we read the Megillah and give matanot le'evyonim. On Shabbat, we say Al Hanisim in davening and benching, and we read the bit of Purim in the Torah. On Sunday, we eat Seudat Purim and give Mishloach Manot. So that is what we do. Now the question is why, and I'm going to discuss it in a moment. But before that, I want to ask the following question. Since the Megillah is read in Yerushalayim on Friday, when it is our Purim in Ra'anana, then at the end of the day, we read Purim on the same day. So what if I went to visit Yerushalayim on Friday for whatever reason, and I heard from a Jerusalemite person Kriyat HaMegillah on that Friday? Is that okay? Or someone from Yerushalayim came to visit me and heard the Megillah here in Ra'anana, not in Yerushalayim. Is that okay? Or maybe he read the Megillah here, but not only for himself, but for a group of people from Ra'anana as well. Is that okay? Now you're probably thinking, what's wrong with me? What is the question? Of course it's okay. Why not? We both have the obligation to read the Megillah. He can read it for us. We can read it for him. If I heard it in Yerushalayim, it doesn't matter. It's my day of Purim. So I heard the Megillah. Hearing the Megillah is hearing the Megillah. What does it matter where I hear it and who am I hearing it from? So as we're going to see in a moment, it is not that simple. It is not that simple. Another question is, what happens if a person from Ra'anana goes to Yerushalayim for Shabbat? So he was here for Purim, carried out all the mitzvot of Purim like a good Ra'ananite, and then went to Jerusalem for Shabbat. Now, Shabbat is Purim in Yerushalayim. Now, on a normal year, according to most opinions, there is one opinion, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, who holds, if on the 14th you're in a city that celebrates Purim on the 14th, then you celebrated Purim. If you went then on the 15th to a city that celebrates on the 15th, you don't have to celebrate it again because you personally had already celebrated Purim. That's only the Rosh's opinion. Most others hold that no, since you didn't, since on the 15th you are in Yerushalayim, then you have to celebrate Purim again, because the fact that you celebrated Purim on the 14th doesn't matter now on the 15th. If you are in Yerushalayim, and that is the day that you celebrate in Yerushalayim, you have to celebrate on the 15th. Now, it doesn't mean that if you pass through Yerushalayim on the 15th, you have to celebrate Purim on the 15th. You have to be in Yerushalayim at night of the 15th and have in mind to stay there until the morning. And then that is, that commits you to celebrating Purim on the 15th as well. That is in a normal year. Would that apply to this year as well? So if I went to Yerushalayim for Shabbat, do I now have to say Ala Nisim on Shabbat, and come Sunday, I'll have to do Seudat Purim and Mishloach Manot because I was in Yerushalayim on the 15th? So these are questions which I'm going to explore right now. So source number one on the page says it's the first Mishnah in Masechet Megillah. So reading the Megillah is quite interesting. The Megillah is not read on one day, not even on 2 days, but on 5 possible days. 5? No, 11, 12, 13, 14, yes, 15. 5 possible days. Megillah Nikret, the Megillah is read Be'achadasar on the 11th of Adar, Bishnei Masar, the 12th of Adar, Bishlosha Asar, the 13th, Be'arba Asar, the 14th, B'chamisha Asar, the 15th, Lo pachot velo yoter, not less nor more. Meaning before the 11th, it may not be read. Beyond the 15th, it may not be read. But on each of these days, depending on circumstances, it may be read. How? So let's see. Krachin hamukafin choma mimot Yoshua bin Nun, cities which have a wall around them from the days of Yoshua bin Nun, korin b'chamisha asar, they read on the 15th, like Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is an ancient city, 3,000 years old. It had a wall around it already during the days of Yoshua bin Nun. It's that old. You read on the 15th, Kfarim v'ayarot gdolot, villages and big cities that did not have a wall around them during the days of Yoshua, Korin be'arba asar, they read the Megillah on the 14th, like in Ra'anana. Ela, however, shehakfarim makdimin leyom haknisa. In villages which might not have a minyan, or might not have a kosher Megillah, or might not have someone who knows how to read those days. Yes, that was a possibility in small villages. So when do they read? Yom HaKnisa, in the nearest market day, because in the market day, the villages go into the bigger cities to sell their produce. And since they're there on that day, then they gather a minyan, find someone who knows to read the Megillah, and they read the Megillah on that day. Now, that does not mean that they celebrate Purim on that day, but they read the Megillah on that day. Now, what were the market days? The market days were Monday and Thursday. Mondays and Thursdays. So the first Monday or Thursday that occurs before the 14th, that is the day when the villages listen to the Megillah listen to the reading of the Megillah in the city. So if, let's say, the 14th was on Tuesday, then the Monday before that, on the 13th, they would hear the Megillah in the city. If it was on the 14th falls on Wednesday, then the Monday beforehand was on the 12th. So on the 12th, they heard the Megillah. What if if it falls on Sunday, the 14th falls on Sunday, then the Thursday before that is on the 11th. They heard the Megillah on the 11th. So these are the possibilities. Okay, so Megillah, theoretically, depending on circumstances, can be read on the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, and 15th. Nowadays, we don't have small villages that don't have a Megillah or that don't have someone who can read. In fact, today, even if there were such a place, then it's not a problem. They jump into the car and ride to the nearby place where there is someone who can read for them. So reading on 11th, 12th, and 13th does not apply nowadays, but 14th and 15th, as we know, does apply. Okay. Now for okay, so that is how the Megillah is, the days that we read the Megillah is structured. Now later on, the Gemara discusses what happens if it falls on Shabbat, if the 15th falls on Shabbat. So the Braita tells us, a Braita is an ancient Tannaitic source that tells us that we don't read the Megillah on Shabbat, even if, not necessarily at the 15th, I'm sorry. Nowadays, today, only the 15th can fall on Shabbat. The 14th of Adar will never fall on Shabbat according to our calendar. But during the days of the Mishnah, they didn't have a set calendar, so it could be that also the 14th would have fallen on Shabbat. So if either the 14th or the 15th fall on Shabbat, the Megillah is not read on that Shabbat. So when is it read? Again, we take it a day, we never postpone the Megillah, we take it earlier. So we would read it on the Friday, on the 14th. On the 14th, if the 15th fell on Shabbat, and on the 13th, if the 14th fell on Shabbat. Okay, now the Gemara asks in Masechet Megillah, Daf Daled, everyone agrees that you do not read the Megillah on Shabbat. Ma'itama, but why? What's the problem? Reading Megillah is not Chilul Shabbat. Why not read it? So Rabbah says everyone is obligated to read the Megillah, but not everyone knows how to read. Not all cities those days, in fact, most cities didn't have an eruv around the entire city, and the person might take his Megillah to go to someone who knows to read it in order for him to teach him how to read it. And he'll end up carrying the Megillah in Reshut HaRabim. In order to prevent that situation, the rabbis decided you don't read the Megillah on Shabbat. As Rabbah, v'hainu tama de shofar, v'hainu tama de lulav. That is the reason why we also, when Shabbat falls, when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, we don't blow the shofar. When Sukkot falls on Shabbat, we don't shake the lulav for that exact reason, because a shofar, a lulav, a person might carry 4 amot b'reshut harabim, and you are not allowed to carry outside in the street without an eruv. So that is Rabbah's reason. Rabbah's reason is people might carry the Megillah. We don't want them to do so, so we don't read it on Shabbat. So when do we read it? On the 14th, because the 17th won't be a proper day to read it on. The 14th is one of the 5 days that the Mishnah mentioned, right? Between the 11th and the 15th, those are the days on which you read the Megillah. So if we don't read it on the 15th, we can say, okay, let's read it on the 16th. No, the 16th is not a day on which we read it. So we take it a day earlier to the 14th. Okay. Rav Yosef Amar, no. Rav Yosef says, no, he doesn't accept Rabbah's reason. That's not the reason. We're not concerned with people carrying the Megillah. The Megillah is in shul. People come to shul, hear the Megillah. That wouldn't be the problem. The problem is different. Mikra Megillah, the reading of Megillah, and Matanot LaEvyonim are linked, because the poor people, they hear, today we're reading the Megillah, they immediately associate it with the Matanot LaEvyonim, with the gifts to the poor that are going to give. So they all come to shul. They don't realize, yes, Shabbat, not everyone knows. And they're accepting to get Matanot LaEvyonim, and they're very disappointed when they don't get it. So you cannot have it together. Matanot LaEvyonim we cannot do on Shabbat, so we do it on a different day. Therefore, we also move the Mikra Megillah to that different day, because if we would leave Mikra Megillah on the day, they wouldn't know to come on Friday or Sunday, because the Megillah is not read. So therefore, that is why we read it on Friday, in order for the poor people to know this is the day that you are going to give to receive the gifts. Okay, is there a difference between these two reasons? The Tuei Even, Reb Aryeh Leib Ginsburg, one of the great European rabbis of 300 years ago, the last 20 years of his life, he's known mainly for his work, the Shagat Aryeh, and he's referred to as the Shagat Aryeh. The last 20 years of his life, he was the Rosh Yeshiva and Av Beit in Metz in France. He came there. He applied to the job when he was 70 years old, and the community were a bit concerned. 70 years old, 300 years ago, that is more or less the age when someone has 1 foot in the ground or in the grave already. It wasn't like today that 70 is still young. So, but he promised them that he feels very strong, and he feels that he's going to go on for another 20 years. They believed him, they accepted him as the rabbi, and indeed he lived another 20 years. He died at the ripe age of 90. Anyhow, he has a book called Tuei Even on the Gemara, and he suggests that there is a difference between these two reasons. Why? Well, first of all, let's explore what type of obligation is it to read the Megillah. We know there are mainly 2 types of obligations. We have mitzvot which are deoraita from the Torah, and we have mitzvot which are the Rabbanan. the rabbis told us. Mikra Megillah, what is it? It's not from the Torah, right? But it's also not a rabbinic obligation. It's something in between. In the Gemara and the Shas, we have a few times the concept of Divrei Kabbalah. Divrei Kabbalah meaning we accepted it from earlier generations. This is an early tradition. So it's something in between. It's not a divine revelation part of the Torah, but it's also not a rabbinic decree. It's something in between. It's an ancient tradition of the people. So that is Purim, Divrei Kabbalah. If you look at source number 3, the Rambam says, Kriyat HaMegillah bizmana mitzvat aseh midivrei sofrim, והדברים ידועים שהיא תקנת נביאים. So he mentions two things which are probably his interpretation to Divrei Kabbalah. Divrei Sofrim are the words of the scribes. The scribes are mainly Ezra, Nehemiah, and the great assembly of those days, the early days of the Second Temple. So he understands that it was established those days, but it wasn't merely an establishment of the scribes only, but as he goes on and says, there were also prophets involved. We know that Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi were part of the Great Assembly, so therefore it has its special status. It's not merely a rabbinic decree, it's Divrei Kabbalah. So what does that mean, says the Turei Even? That means to say that when I read the Megillah, I'm not merely committing a decree of the rabbis, but I'm carrying out an ancient tradition. Okay, now, when Purim falls on Shabbat, we don't read the Megillah on Shabbat, we read it on the Friday. Who decided that? Who decided not to read it on Shabbat, but to read it on the Friday? So there are two possibilities. One possibility is when the ancient custom was established by the prophets, then they've established it in such a way that on Shabbat, you don't read it. When it falls on Shabbat, you read it on Friday. So when we read it on Friday, that is the original tradition. Another possibility is no. Originally, we read it on the 15th, when that means to say when the 15th falls on Shabbat in Yerushalayim, in cities that have a wall around them from the days of Yeshua, we read them on the 15th. That is the original decree by the scribes and the prophets. That is the ancient custom. Then come along the rabbis and say, just a minute. It creates problems. People are carrying the Megillah. We are going to cancel it on Shabbat and instead read it on Friday. Now, why would they do they have the power to do that? Of course they have the power to do that. They even canceled blowing the shofar on Shabbat, which is a Torah obligation. So of course they could cancel the Megillah and say, let's do it on the Friday instead. Okay, so says the Turei Even, let's now go back to Rabbi and Rav Yosef. If Rabbi is telling me that the reason is because we may carry, that sounds like a rabbinic matter. Meaning the rabbis were worried and therefore they canceled it on Shabbat and moved it to Friday. Rav Yosef is telling me, no, it's because of the poor people. Now, the Turei Even wants to understand that the poor people, they would always associate it with Kriyat Megillah. Nothing had changed, so it must be that that was the original decree. Now, what is the difference? What would be the difference? So says the Turei Even like this. If the original halacha is that when Purim falls on Shabbat, we read the Megillah on Friday, then the reading of the Megillah on Friday carries the same weight as in every other year. It's an ancient custom. We are fulfilling an ancient custom when we read the Megillah. But if it is a later rabbinic matter that it was moved from Shabbat to Friday, then when in Yerushalayim we read the Megillah on Friday, it doesn't carry the same weight. It's a rabbinic reading of the Megillah. It's not the ancient custom. So in Ra'anana, we read it on Friday because it is the ancient custom is that outside of Yerushalayim is read on Friday on the 14th. But in Yerushalayim it's read on Friday, not because that is the ancient custom, not because that is the Sofrim, but because the rabbis later on moved it to Friday. So it carries less weight. So if I, a person who lives in Ra'anana, here's the Megillah from a person who lives in Yerushalayim, either in Yerushalayim or Ra'anana, but the person reading the Megillah is not obligated to read it because of the ancient custom, but just because of the rabbinic decree, then his reading carries less weight than my obligation. So he may not help me fulfill my obligation. I have to hear it from a person that is obligated just as myself. For instance, there is a whole discussion that we say, let's say there are mitzvot. Let's say if I heard a bracha from a child who is not bar mitzvah, and I say amen. And if it's a bracha that I am obligated to say, I don't fulfill my obligation by that because that child is not obligated in the same way that I am. And that will be also in other cases as well. So therefore, the Tuei Even says, since we are not clear why we actually do not read the Megillah, and actually the opinion of Rabbah seems to be the more prevailing one, so the reading on Friday in Yerushalayim doesn't carry the same weight. And therefore, a person from Ra'anana who went on Friday night, on Friday morning to Yerushalayim, didn't hear the Megillah in Ra'anana, heard it only in Yerushalayim from a person in Yerushalayim, did not fulfill his obligation according to that. He has to hear it from a person who lives in Ra'anana. So that is one thing. So if someone is planning to go to Yerushalayim on Friday morning, he should make sure he hears the Megillah before he leaves Ra'anana, or he may hear it in Yerushalayim, but from a person who, like himself, spent the day, the night, and the morning not in Yerushalayim, who's obligated to read it, not as a Jerusalemite, but as an outside Jerusalemite. Okay, that's the one matter. The next matter is, what happens if a person, I'm in Ra'anana, then I go to Yerushalayim for Shabbat. Do I have to, is it my Purim on Shabbat as well? Because I spend it in Yerushalayim. So here I don't want to get into the whole discussion because we got into one discussion. This, I'll just give you the bottom line. It is complicated. There are various opinions, but the bottom line is, no, this year, if you were on Friday in Ra'anana and you fulfilled all the mitzvot of Purim in Ra'anana, you may go for Shabbat to Yerushalayim, and you don't have to fulfill the mitzvot again in Yerushalayim. It's not Purim for you. You don't have to do the Suda again on Sunday, etc., etc. Okay. Let's see if I will. Okay, there is another matter, but I won't get into it right now because we don't. I want to get to the second part of the shiur. It's going to be a shorter part, but I think we spent enough time on this. So the next part, before I get into the next part, just to be clear, the bottom line is this: if on Thursday night I was in Ra'anana and I meant to stay in Ra'anana until the morning, and I indeed end up staying until the morning, then my Purim is outside of Yerushalayim. I'm obligated to carry out all the mitzvot on the Friday, and so I should do. And I have to then hear the Megillah from a person who lives in Ra'anana, or not only in Ra'anana, but outside of Yerushalayim, not in Yerushalayim. I'm a person who was in Yerushalayim. Okay, that's. I may, however, go to Yerushalayim if after I fulfill the mitzvot in Ra'anana, I go to Yerushalayim. I could do in Yerushalayim whatever I want. It's not Purim for me again on Shabbat and on Sunday. Okay. Next matter. Don't know why it jumped like that. This has to be here. Okay. Purim falls on Friday. When do we have the Seudah on Friday? So the Shulchan Aruch in source number 8, in Siman Reish Mem Tet, Seif Bet, tells us, אסור לקבוע בערב שבת סעודה ומשתה שאינו רגיל בימי החול, ואפילו היא סעודת אירוסין מפני כבוד השבת, שייכנס לשבת שהוא תאב לאכול, וכל היום בכלל האיסור. Meaning, you are not allowed to have an extraordinary meal on Shabbat, on Friday. Why? Because you want to come into Shabbat when you have a healthy appetite. And the entire day is under this prohibition of having an extraordinary meal. However, says the Ramah, Moshe Esrelish, Useuda shezmana erev Shabbat. However, if there is a meal of a mitzvah, an extraordinary meal, but that this is the day that it should be, like a brit or pidyon haben, so this is the 8th day, or this is the day on which I'm doing the brit. I can't do it another day, so I have to do a mitzvah, mutar, it is allowed, ken ireli v'chen haminyan pashut. It is allowed. Okay. ולאכול ולשתות בקביעת סעודה, אפילו סעודה שרגיל בה בחול, כל היום מותר להתחיל מן הדין, אבל מצווה להימנע מלקבוע סעודה שנהג בה בחול, מט' שעות ולמעלה. Okay, now continues the Shulchan Aruch to say, but an ordinary meal that I have every day, I'm allowed to have on Shabbat as well. However, it is a mitzvah to not have my meal from the 9th hour onwards. The 9th hour onwards means from about 3 hours before nightfall. From about 3 hours before nightfall, I shouldn't have a meal at all. And the whole day I shouldn't have an extraordinary meal. Now, what's the problem? This year we have the Mishteh of Purim. That's an extraordinary meal. How could we have it? So, of course, it falls under Useuda shezmana erev Shabbat. It is the meal that its day, this is the proper day on which to have it. We have no choice. We have to have it. So we have it. However, when? What time of the day should we have it? So in Siman Tafresh Tzadi Hey, the Shulchan Aruch discusses Purim, and the Haggadah, Reb Moshe Esrelish tells us the following. Usually on an ordinary year, we have the Seudah of Purim after Mincha. And Ma'ariv we have later during the night. We daven mincha gdola in order to give us enough time to have the Seudah during the day. The main part of the meal should be during the day. He says not as many people do, that they start eating on the last minute, right before Shkia, and the main part of the meal is already at night of the next day. No, that's not good. You have to start early enough. Now, that's every year. But then what happens when it falls on Friday? When Purim falls on Friday, יעשו הסעודה בשחרית משום כבוד שבת, then they have to do the meal in the morning because in order to honor Shabbat, meaning we shouldn't have a big meal right before Shabbat. Comes Shabbat, we don't have our appetite with us. So therefore we should have it in the morning. And he says, and just that you know, any Purim, if you want to have your Seudah as breakfast, that's okay. You may do so. Okay. Meaning, when is the proper time to have it now on Friday? We have no choice. We have to have it on Friday. However, says the Ramah, we should have it in the morning. Says the Mishnah Berurah there. Okay, so he says every year we don't do it in the morning, early in the morning, because we have the other mitzvot. We have mishloach manot, and we have other things, and then we have mincha, and therefore we get to the Seudah only after mincha. But on Friday, we should do it in the morning. Okay, now the Mishnah Berurah, look at Yud, Seudah b'shacharit, tells us what does it mean in the morning. Hainu kodem chatzot hayom lechatchila. Says better that it's before midday, sometime before midday. Okay, sort of a brunch. But then look at source 11. So it seems from the Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Berurah that we should have our Seudah as a brunch. That's the proper time. And that is indeed the minhag of the prevailing minhag when Purim falls on Friday. But then look at source number 11. ואף אנו ואבותינו נוהגים בפורים שחל להיות ערב שבת שמתחילים בסעודה מבעוד יום עד שיקדש היום, עד שיקדש היום, ופורסים מפה ומקדשים וגומרים את הסעודה מזכירים בה של פורים מטעם זה שהרי אף 15 יום. אוקיי. המאירי, רבי מנחם המאירי, one of the early Rishonim, tells us our tradition, meaning his tradition, his family tradition, his what they used to do where he lived, on Purim that fell on Friday, they didn't do the Seudah in the morning. They used to begin it sometime during the day, and when sunset came, they would cover they would cover the challah, say kiddush, and then continue the meal into Shabbat. And when they bench, they say both retzeh, because it's Shabbat, and ala nisim. Now, how do you say ala nisim? It's already not Purim. It's already it's nightfall. So he says you could sharei af 15 yom nesu. The 15th is still Purim as well in Yerushalayim. והדין נותן להזכיר בה של פורים, אף על פי שעבר יום 14 בשעת הברכה. So that's what they did. Where did that come from, this halacha? So we don't have time to look into all the sources. Let's just see source number 12 quickly. מפסיקין לשבתות דברי רבי יהודה, רבי יוסי אומר אין מפסיקין. There is a dispute among the Tanaim in if a person began to eat before Shabbat, comes Shabbat, what does he do? Rabbi Yehuda says he must stop his meal immediately. You may not eat before Kiddush. You cannot do a Kiddush in the middle of the meal. You have to stop your meal, bench, go daven, then make Kiddush, and do it. Rabbi Yossi Omer ein mafsikin. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you don't have to stop. You have to do Kiddush. Okay, finish your meal, and then make Kiddush. Why do you have to not finish your meal? Okay, what exactly is the machloket between them? We won't get into right now at the moment. But then there is a third opinion. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, a later Amora, a few hundred years later, he comes and he says, En halacha lo k'Rab Yehuda v'lo k'Rab Yossi. That is not the halacha. On the one hand, he doesn't have to stop the meal. On the other hand, he may not continue the meal. So what does he do? Ela pores mapa u'mekadesh. He covers the bread, does kiddush, and then continues the meal. That is considered. That is called the halacha of pores mapa u'mekadesh. And that halacha is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Reish Ayin Aleph, and that is what is done. So what do? You started the meal. Let's say in this case, your Sudat Purim on the Friday. You eat. Comes time to accept Shabbat, you accept Shabbat. How do you accept Shabbat? You say Vayechulu, or you say I accept Shabbat, or you say Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat, something that indicates that you accepted Shabbat upon yourself. The women light Shabbat candles, and that's it. It's now Shabbat. What do you do now? You do Kiddush. How do you do Kiddush? You take a cup of wine, and you say Kiddush over a cup of wine. Now, you don't say Borei Pri HaGefen because you already had wine during the meal. You already started your meal. You had wine on your Purim during the Purim meal, and you're still in that meal, so you don't say Borei Pri HaGefen. You say Kiddush without Borei Pri HaGefen, meaning you say Vayechulu, and then you go straight into Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho be'avar v'ratzon hinchilanu, etc. Baruch Atah Hashem mekadesh haShabbat. And then you drink the wine without saying Borei Pri HaGefen because you already said Borei Pri HaGefen before. And then you take the cover off of the bread and you eat some bread, again, without a bracha. Now here the Shulchan Aruch brings a machloket. Some say you do say a bracha over the bread. Some say you don't. Why would you say bracha over bread? You already had bread already. So some say maybe the kiddush is a hefsek. Okay, there are two opinions. We won't get into it. However, the Mishnah Berurah, source number 14, tells us we ordinarily have a concept of safek brachot leakel. When there is a doubt whether to say bracha or not, we don't say it. We take the more lenient approach and don't say the bracha. Therefore, you don't say hamotzi. There is another question whether I need a lechem mishne. I bring another loaf of bread, and we do bring another loaf of bread. So we had already bread. There are the bread that we're eating. We take another whole loaf of bread, or maybe even two if someone really wants to do it nicely. You put it under the challah cover with all the rest of the bread that is on the table, make kiddush as I said, and continue the meal. After the meal, you say Birkat HaMazon. Now again, we said there is a discussion of whether to say Al HaNisim, not to say Al HaNisim. You say Al HaNisim, that is our minhag. And then after that, you go and daven Ma'ariv. Now, if there are enough people that would do it, it could be a late Ma'ariv, 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, whenever it is. And that's that. So that is the halacha of Poes Mapao Mekadesh. Now, it's a very rare way of doing it. In the Hasidic circles, it is more common. In Hasidic circles, they do it not only on Purim, but in some Hasidic communities, let's say on a case where you have Yom Tov right before Shabbat or Shabbat right before Yom Tov, then they also do it. Why? Because the Rebbe starts his Tish at some point in the afternoon, and it usually runs into the night. And then they would do it this way. And it's quite a common thing. In the non-Hasidic circles, it is less common. So to summarize what I said, there are two ways of having the Seudah on Purim. The more common one, and the one that is more straightforward, according to the Shulchan Aruch, is to have it as sort of a brunch before midday. The less common one, but also a proper valid way, is to have it later in the afternoon, to start more or less, if a person really wants to do it right, then to start it before the end of the 9th hour. That means before about 3 o'clock, or I think it's 3:10 this year. And to start the Purim Seudah comes the time for Hadlakat Nerot. The women light nerot, and the bread is covered. Kiddush is made over a cup of wine without saying Borei Pri HaGefen, and the meal continues as the Shabbat meal. So you started as the Purim meal, and the same meal as the Purim meal, and that's that. Do you daven Kabbalat Shabbat at all? That's a good question. Many people, what they do, they would do it at the meal. When they accept Shabbat, they would say the entire Kabbalat Shabbat. Some people won't do it. It's probably better to do it because our minhag is to do Kabbalat Shabbat every Shabbat. So you would do it at the meal when you accepted Shabbat. You would say the entire Kabbalat Shabbat. And Mariv, you would say later after the meal. Okay, that's what I had to share with you today. So I'll just, can you make early Shabbat and then make the Purim Shabbat meal? Okay, that is a very good question. Rav Eliashiv actually writes that a person could, it's not the preferred way to do it. He writes it's best to do it in the morning as one should. If one didn't, then what is called bediavad, post facto, they may accept Shabbat early and then have the meal as a combined Purim Shabbat meal. But Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says no. Even in that case, it's better to do it the way I said right now of Poes Mapa, because he says once you accepted Shabbat, then Shabbat came after Purim, then it's also Shabbat, also Purim. It's a bit strange. So it's probably preferable to do it, to start it as a Purim Suda and then do it as I said. But it is possible, if someone for whatever reason is not comfortable with it, he could do it that way. Do we make Hamotzi again after Kiddush? No, we don't. We don't. There is a dispute whether to make or not. There are two opinions in the Shulchan Aruch, and we don't. We don't make Hamotzi after Kiddush. Okay, so I'll summarize what we do. Yes Lechem Mishne, but without Hamotzi. So again, I'll summarize what we do. We start the meal during Purim, before 3 and 10 minutes. We have the meal, comes the time for candle lighting. We light candles, we accept Shabbat. If someone wants to say the entire Kabbalat Shabbat, that is the best thing to do. And then we say Kiddush. We take a cup of wine, say the Kiddush without Borei Pri HaGefen. We take out the Borei Pri HaGefen, but we say everything else. Drink the wine, put it down, reveal the chalot, which we covered with the challah cover, and with Lechem Mishne, cut it, give it to the people around, and eat it without saying Hamotzi, Now, something that we should be careful of is to eat enough bread before and enough bread after, because before we accept Shabbat, we have to eat from the bread enough on the account of Purim Seudah. So the right amount is kabetza, about the size of it's about half a slice. And after we accepted Shabbat, we should eat another piece of bread on account of Shabbat. And then when we bench, we say Al Anisim and Retzeh, and then we go and daven Mariv after we did so. If people would organize a minyan for that, that would be the best, to daven with a minyan after the meal. So these are the two possibilities: either a brunch in the morning, or breakfast or brunch in the morning, or Poes Mapao Mekadesh. Those are the two good possibilities of Seudat Purim. So thank you very much. I wish us all Purim Sameach. And yeah, I hope we'll know more of how exactly we're going to do Purim and Shul, etc. by the time Purim comes. I'm sure we will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.